I ask no favor for my sex. All I ask of our brethren is that they take their feet off our necks.
After a lifetime of fighting tirelessly for gender equality and societal change in the courtroom, battling sexism throughout her life, and juggling the rigorous demands of being a devoted wife and mother while still in law school, Ruth Bader Ginsburg continues to fight societal norms as a revolutionary woman who inspires American youth.
Born on March 15, 1933, in Brooklyn, New York, Ruth Bader Ginsburg defied sexist societal norms and the structure of her low-income neighborhood to graduate first in her class at James Madison High School and at Cornell University, where she was one of the only women in her class. Shortly after she graduated from Cornell, she married Martin, also known as Marty Ginsburg, in June 1954. They had their first child, Jane, after Marty was drafted into the Vietnam War. He was discharged after 2 years and returned to Harvard Law School, where Ruth also enrolled while she learned to balance life as a mother and her new role as a law student. With only 8 other women in her class of 500, she encountered a very male-dominated and hostile environment. The women were criticized by the dean for taking the spots of perfectly eligible men, but Ruth kept going and excelled academically, eventually becoming part of the prestigious Harvard Law Review.
I became a lawyer when women were not wanted by the legal profession.
Thousands of state and federal laws discriminated on the basis of gender. She was following in the footsteps of the battle for racial equality. She wanted equal protection for women.
Marty was diagnosed with testicular cancer in 1956, requiring rigorous treatment and recovery. She cared for her young daughter and recovering husband, taking notes for him in classes while she continued her own law studies. Marty recovered, graduated from law school, and accepted a position at a New York law firm. She joined Marty in New York City and transferred to Columbia Law School, where she was elected to the school's law review. She graduated first in her class in 1959, but despite her outstanding academic record, she continued to encounter gender discrimination while seeking employment after graduation.
I did see myself as kind of a kindergarten teacher in those days because the judges didn't think sex discrimination existed. Well, one of the things I tried to plant in their minds was think about how you would like the world to be for your daughters and granddaughters.
The gender line helps to keep women not on a pedestal, but in a cage.
She captured for the male members of the court what it was like to be a second-class citizen.
The point is that the discriminatory line almost inevitably hurts women. Men and women are persons of equal dignity, and they should count equally before the law.
Ruth was finally able to overcome the discrimination and got a job as a clerk for U.S. District Judge Edmund Palmieri from 1959 to 1961. She then taught at Rutgers Law School while leading a seminar about women and the law from 1963 to 1972, and then went on to teach at Columbia University, where she worked till 1980, becoming the first female tenured professor. During the 70s, she also served as the director of the Women's Rights Project of the ACLU, for which she argued 6 landmark cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. After constantly proving that she was capable of doing this work, in 1980, President Jimmy Carter appointed Ruth Bader Ginsburg to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia.
After careful reflection, I am proud to nominate for Associate Justice of the Supreme Court Judge Ruth Bader Ginsburg of the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia. I will send her name to the Senate to fill the vacancy created by Justice White's retirement. As I told Judge Ginsburg last night when I called to ask her to accept the nomination, I decided on her for 3 reasons. First, in her years on the bench, she has genuinely distinguished herself as one of our nation's best judges. Progressive in outlook, wise in judgment, balanced and fair in her opinions. Second, over the course of a lifetime, in her pioneering work in behalf of the women of this country, she has compiled a truly historic record of achievement in the finest traditions of American law and citizenship. And finally, I believe that in the years ahead, she will be able to be a force for consensus building on the Supreme Court, just as she has been on the Court of Appeals.
After serving on the U.S. Court of Appeals for 13 years, President Bill Clinton appointed Ruth Bader Ginsburg to the U.S. Supreme Court, making her the second female justice. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearings were unusually civil despite several senators conveying concern over Ginsburg's ambiguous answers to hypothetical circumstances. Many expressed concern over how she could change from a social advocate to a Supreme Court justice. In the end, she was undoubtedly confirmed by the Senate 96-3. In 1996, she composed the Supreme Court's milestone decision in United States v. Virginia, which held that the Virginia Military Institute could not refuse to admit women. Despite her notoriety for limited composition, she gained significant attention for her dissenting opinion in the case of Bush v. Gore, which effectively decided the 2000 presidential election between George W. Bush and Al Gore. Objecting to the court's majority opinion favoring Bush, she deliberately and precisely concluded her decision with the words, quote, "I dissent," a noteworthy departure from the norm of including respectfully.
I have had the great good fortune to share life with a partner truly extraordinary for his generation.
He was the first boy I ever knew who cared that I had a brain.
After being married for 56 years, Marty Ginsburg died on June 27, 2010. She always described him as her greatest supporter. Their relationship was always said to be different from the norm. Marty was outgoing and always told jokes, while Ruth was focused, reserved, and shy. When asked, Marty said that the reason their marriage was so successful was because my wife doesn't give me any advice about cooking, and I don't give her any advice about the law. The day after his death, Ruth was at work on the court for the last day of the 2010 term.
We welcome today Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
She's become such an icon.
Do you mind signing this copy?
I am 84 years old and everyone wants to take a picture with me.
Notorious RBG. Yeah.
When you come right down to it, the closest thing to a superhero I know.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg changed the way the world is for American women.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg has been a longtime supporter of the Me Too movement. When talking about the Me Too movement in 2018, she remembered a time in which she had to deal with the advances of a professor at Cornell University.
I'm taking a chemistry course at Cornell, and my instructor said, because I was uncertain about my ability in that field, he said, "I'll give you a practice exam." So he gave me a practice exam. The next day, on the test is the practice exam, and I knew exactly what he wanted in return. I went to his office and I said, how dare you do this? And that was the end of that.
In 2016, Ruth released her memoir, My Own Words, which became a New York Times bestseller.
One of the things that I'm struck by as I look back on it is how unprepared the defendants were to fight back. We won because the strategy was brilliant. We won because we were smart and prepared and we fought hard.
You couldn't miss what Ruth was doing during the 70s.
She was creating a legal landscape. She is a center of power on and off the court.
Every time Justice Ginsburg wrote a dissent, the internet would explode.
I came up with a couple slogans. You can't spell truth without Ruth.
I surely would not be in this room today without the determined efforts of men and women who kept dreams alive.